Yo, goons, what's good? Today, a critical video for the current and future meta of Goldlewis. We're going to be discussing fuzzies and the nature of how you should run offense and incorporate them therein in Season 4. So the reason this is so important is because the way that Goldlewis should spend his meter has fundamentally changed in Season 4. The reason? Chip damage has been cut in half. This sort of thing, these pressure extensions, designed to force the opponent to make a decision based on either losing a ton of HP to chip or draining all their meter, etc., not nearly as good, because you're doing half the chip damage that you were before. And in fact, strategizing your offense around chipping the opponent out, generally not even viable at all anymore, and not advisable. There are much better meter spends that are much better normalized for the opponent's skill level. In other words, things that force the opponent to directly guess in can mix up situations, unlike some of these. Now, this kind of thing can be good, particularly if you can force either a same frame or close to same frame strike throw coming out of guard crush. As long as you can hit it kind of in the opponent's jump startup window, you'll have more or less a true mix-up on your hands. Granted, you also have to represent shimmy to make it a real mix-up for strike throw with guard crush there. That actually depends a lot on if the opponent is FDing. Because if I set Soul to FD here and I go for kind of that exact same meter spend, like this, I definitely don't have time to same frame strike throw him coming out of guard crush. Even if I run up like as fast as possible, do as kind of far of a close slash as I can, it won't be enough. And strong players are not actually going to get opened up by that consistently. Rather, they're not going to feel like they're in a mix-up situation in the same way they are if they block like a point-blank 842 or something of that nature. But the fuzzies, on the other hand, this is a canned 50-50. And it doesn't matter whether you're Jack, it doesn't matter if you're Little Timmy 123. The moment you block a BT standing, and Goldlewis has meter to RC it, or if you set it up in myriad of other ways that we'll discuss later, you are guessing for your life on an unfuzzy blockable, unreactable, very high reward 50-50. Pressure on block is not as good as some of those other meter spends, but it doesn't matter because the pressure for those ones is way weaker now as a result of, you know, those chip changes, especially if you're using them to try to open someone up. That's why we use meter on offense in this game, is it not? It's to try to score a hit. And fuzzies actually strike the better balance of kind of what you're spending versus what you're getting, thanks to these changes. Now, if you're a longtime Goldlewis player, you may think that you have a solid handle on all these sorts of fuzzies and when to use them and how to apply them and such. I promise you that you don't, because there is only one singular player on this earth that is correctly applying Goldlewis fuzzies, and it happens to be the case that that is rank 13, the strongly qualified the Arc World Tour finalist, and who just had a phenomenal top 8 run at Frosty Faustings recently. Now, we've been in the mines developing fuzzies on our own, actually, and conferring, and so I know for a fact that a lot of these are not really out there in the ether yet. However, they are extremely strong, but very contextual, and depend on many different factors. So I figured we'd work up the ladder from like the most basic and applicable fuzzies to sort of the more advanced ones, and ones that have different benefits and cover different bases, because that's actually a very interesting aspect of this character and this whole can of worms when it comes to fuzzies. There are very few that are universal, and in fact, there's kind of a heavy degree of non-intersection from fuzzy to fuzzy, especially along the later ones. So let's get into it. So first off, a couple things to clarify. To check if you're actually doing a fuzzy correctly, I would say you want these settings. So you want reversal 6p on block, and then, of course, it's best to assume that the opponent is always going to be FDing for these, because many of them will work all the time against every character with no FD. But it's safe to assume that that's always going to be the case, and you have to adjust things based on whether or not they're FDing and for character, etc. And, of course, if they're set to reversal 6p and you try to do a rising aerial and it wasn't gapless, then you're going to get 6p. It's very easy to tell whether or not you were able to actually do the fuzzy. You can only do it if it's gapless, in fact. And of course, JK is 14 frame startup. It's also important to consider if done rising as fast as possible. Pre-jump is 5, JK startup itself is 9. Okay, that's the explanation for that. So keep these things in mind going forward. So the easiest, most universal, basic fuzzy is anytime the opponent blocks a standing BT, you just run up and you threaten the JK, and your low option is now 248. Now, a quick aside, the benefit of our low option went way, way, way up because of security cancels. It's insane how much damage you get off of a low. Like, characters with high-low mix-ups get nowhere near that amount of damage, even with meter. Like, even if they spend meter on the mix-up, like they do the mix-up and then RC to confirm it, it's a wild amount of damage. And that is something that we really, really need to take advantage of. And if you kind of consider the expected value in the sense of this mix-up being a 50-50, you end up with like over 100 damage in many, many situations, particularly if you're able to get a wall break or spend less resources, or if you can super after, especially with some of the later ones since they're more meter efficient. That is a crazy, crazy return for 50 meter, and much, much more than you would get for the other BT resets and extensions right now. Much, much more. But there are a couple benefits to this fuzzy, and every fuzzy has its benefits and drawbacks compared to others. The benefits of this one are that, A, it's universal, so it works on every single character in the game. And B, it works everywhere on the screen. It works mid-screen and corner. And then I would say C, sort of the real draw to this one, is that you can do it in such a way that you end your pressure safely, and you also are able to go for a fuzzy. So for some of these, you might need to force the opponent to stand, like if you want a fuzzy off of 486 or 862. That will guarantee that you can go for the fuzzy, but if you don't have 50 meter, it doesn't matter. But if you sort of do that and then extend your pressure, and the opponent's trying to jump or whatever, and you make them block this kind of thing, he's at 6p right now, but suppose you block that, and they block it standing, then you're able to fuzzy off of this. That's really, really nice. You don't have to do anything greedy. You just get your 50 meter, confirm if they're standing, then you fuzzy. And so that is quite nice. You don't need resources to start necessarily, and you can do it quite late into your pressure. The only sort of caveat there is that you want to make sure you have sufficient space for it. So for example, if I try to fuzzy from here, not a chance in hell that it's going to work. Most of the time, you want the opponent to have that RC slowdown. You see that? When I RC at him, so as that clock above his head, that's going to practically guarantee that you can do it. But even if they don't have that, depending on the BT that they blocked, you can still do it from very, very far, especially for 486. And for 862, you can essentially always do it, especially against larger characters and such. But yeah, that's kind of the main draws of this one. The downside is that it's slow RC. It's quite dependent on you actually getting your way in afterward, because if you don't, you're in a lot of meter penalty for one, so you're not going to build meter again afterward. Another issue is that you won't really have strong pressure afterward on block if they do block your fuzzy, although that's essentially going to be a universal aspect here, but it's amplified if you're not building meter because you're in penalty. And then of course, again, another universal issue with all fuzzies, if the opponent chooses to represent DS in that spot, because it's a slow RC, the timing is much more varied, and you can bait it and also do like a strike throw because the opponent's still coming out of guard crush. You can easily same frame strike or throw them, frame one out of guard crush. That's kind of a benefit and a drawback, because on the one hand, you have a lot more control over that since the timing is much more varied on the slow RC as to when you want to do the fuzzies exactly. But on the other hand, if they do successfully DS your mix-up, it feels pretty bad because you just traded 50 meter for 50 burst on a character that in many matchups kind of has to work his way in or spend resources to get in and set up his ideal situation. And that just feels pretty rough, especially against like Chaos, Johnny, May, characters that kind of give Goldlewis a hard time in neutral. Those are the ones that you would like to avoid that situation. And so that's everything I want to say about the classical one. Let's move on to more accessible ones, but aren't necessarily universal. So 486, right? Essentially always minimum plus 14. And as you'll recall, JK is 14 frame startup if you do it as fast as possible. And that actually means that if you're in range for it, you can actually fuzzy practically any character with a rising JK, supposing they blocked that 486. However, there's a big asterisk there, and that's that the opponent wasn't FDing. So you can kind of confirm that. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but you can do it. However, this does actually still work against some characters, even if they FD, but that list is kind of short mid-screen. That's why I have Soul here. So keep in mind he's set to 6p on block, so we can in fact check if this is a fuzzy. And as soon as he blocks that 486, I just do my JKJD, and you can see on the frame bar down here, this is block stun for Soul. It was all gapless, so I didn't get 6p. It's another way you can tell. that is in fact a true fuzzy, which is super strong if you can actually get this situation. Now, this just means that kind of knowledge checking the opponent as they wake up with 486 is just even stronger than it is before. Because if you're against the right characters at the right spacing, you can just fuzzy them. Now again, this is not universal, and in fact the list against whom this works mid-screen is pretty short. It's just Sol, Zato, Leo, Nago, Goldlewis, Asuka, Slayer, and in corner it will work against Potemkin, Bedman, Faust. So, this is something to consider when it comes to all these fuzzies. You really need to have an idea of what characters it does and doesn't work against, because if you try to do this against Geo in either corner or mid-screen, it is not going to work. And in fact, for this particular one, against Geo, it just never works because the properties of when 486 hits are later and her crouch animation and stand animation, things of that nature. It means that you can't actually perform it on her ever. But with no FD, it works against everyone except her, mid-screen and corner, really. So something really, really strong if you're confirming it visually. And one situation that pops up in a lot is if you kind of like do your throw and place the drone. This kind of setup here, if the opponent actually had no meter to begin with, or if drone drains their meter, you can kind of force this situation, which is really, really good. And again, even if they FD, there are some characters that this works against in the corner, Pot, Bedman, Faust. And so you can do some nasty, nasty setups against them to force fuzzies and whatnot. So yeah, that's one that's pretty accessible. The downside, of course, is that 486 is backdashable on reaction. It's even potentially mashable on reaction in some cases, especially if you're trying to do it as a meaty. And again, you need to be point blank. You need to be in JK range for this to work. In those cases, a lot of the time you can be throwable. Strong opponents, especially at top and high levels who have Goldlewis experience, will throw you for that. And that feels awful because you just got your hit with Goldlewis. Even a throw, you took some amount of risk by doing that. You can just like lose as a result of that. So keep that in mind. But yeah, of course, the benefit of this one is that it doesn't cost anything, especially if the opponent has no meter to FD. You can guarantee it against almost every character. And that is super, super, super good. That is a very, very nice benefit to have and important to represent. It's just, again, very spacing dependent, this one, right? You always have to do essentially something that is unsafe to the effect of doing a point blank 486. And by the way, for every fuzzy, I will put down below the characters that it does and doesn't work against. I will just state them every time I do these, but it's going to be easy to forget, so it's down there as well. So 862 is minimum plus 12, right? But it has quite a large set of active frames in front of it, such that you can actually hit this in a way that allows you to go for a fuzzy. You can make it all the way up to plus 16 if you do it correctly. And if you do get a deep enough timing on this, you can in fact do a meterless fuzzy as well. Now, the ones that this works on mid-screen with FD are Asuka, Goldlewis, Pot, Faust, Zato, Leo, Nago, Bedman, and Slayer. Okay? Those are the only ones. So the list is actually kind of short as to who it works on with FD. But without FD, it works on all of those, plus Johnny, Soul, Millia, Ram, Chaos, Testament, Sin, and elph. The rest it doesn't work on at all. And this one I haven't tested in corner, actually. But again, if someone wants to do that, all you have to do is, use the reversal 6P settings and make sure you hit your meaty 862. So you can see there I was plus 14. That was visually not the most meaty one. But because this character is not on the list of point blank with FD, it's not going to work. Only if Soul doesn't FD can I manage to get the fuzzy there. So I'll go ahead and try it. And when I say point blank, I mean very point blank for this one. So this fuzzy is actually very hard to set up. I'm not going to lie, that's the drawback of it. Again, benefit is that it doesn't require a meter. Drawback, it's fairly character specific and very context specific. Like, you probably need to be able to raw to do this. There are some knockdowns where maybe like you can sort of do like a pseudo meaty setup if you find the right frame kill for it. But yeah, it's just difficult and also hard to confirm, but very useful against the characters that it's guaranteed against. You just have to be right up in their face to actually force it. So still, nice to be aware of. The main reason we're covering this one early is accessibility. You don't need meter to do it. That is a huge plus. So bear that in mind. So next up, we have a really, really nice and underused fuzzy in the corner. So if you're locked in block stun when you're landing, you have 14 frames of landing recovery. Guess what is 14 frames startup? That would be our JK. So settings here. We're going to make soul jump in the corner and counterattack again. I have him 6 ping on block to check if we can actually do a fuzzy. And lo and behold, we actually just got one. Now it is a bit spacing dependent. Depends on how high the opponent blocked it. Depends on how far you want to dash in. There's a lot of variance here as to how plus you are. But with time and experience, you can recognize when you are and are not able to go for this fuzzy. It is really, really strong because this situation pops up quite a bit. Sometimes even if the opponent airblocks the BT and they're not just mashing jump again, because it does refresh your jump action, you can also fuzzy them in those cases. And this one works against many, many characters. It doesn't seem to work against Mei, Chipp, Geo. Baiken, not really sure about. If you delay it a lot or get the right 5p timing, maybe. Bridget and Appa. So characters that are kind of short in general. And it happens to be that that's like the same non-fuzzy list for a lot of these setups. Those characters are just difficult to fuzzy in general with Goldlewis. So bear that in mind. But it works against everyone else. And this situation pops up a lot. If they are trying to jump out a drone and you get a good anti-air 5p, especially like if you do this kind of thing, you catch them in the air with a BT block, that is a really, really strong situation to force that fuzzy anyway. And that's nice because that'll work with 684 pretty much guaranteed. You didn't need them to block 684 standing, which many experienced and strong players against Goldlewis will know not to do beyond a certain spacing, block standing against the BTs. So that is a really, really strong one, and I wanted to highlight it because it's not used by many players. Even Rang actually doesn't use this one much. I don't use it enough. The player that uses that one the most is Red I Am Not, and they obviously get a lot of success therein. So definitely keep it in mind. Next up, an extremely strong fuzzy that is universal, so mid-screen and corner. That would be White Wild Assault PRC. If they're standing, you can in fact do a fuzzy overhead, high-low mix-up there, and that is extremely good. The only real downside to this one is that it's very resource intensive, obviously, so if the opponent DSs or YRCs, they might be trading only one resource for your 2 resources, but this is a really strong win con in the clutch or when you need to close out rounds, so important to be aware of. Now for kind of a little bonus fuzzy, this one was found and practically exclusively used by Precho. If the opponent stand blocks the last hit of drone, so the explosion, you can actually do a fuzzy there. You're plus enough to get a JK even on FD, even against Geo. Watch this. Saw that there? I made sure to time it after the last hit of drone. I'll do it again, just to be clear. But I have to say you have to be quite tight on that, because if you're not, it isn't going to work. And so I am not sure if this is visually confirmable if the opponent stand blocks the last hit of drone. It works against everyone, so that's quite nice. And it also, this is pretty funny, works on all 3 levels of drone, which you wouldn't expect to be the case, but is the case. Now this can be used actually in quite a lot of ways. So for example, if I want to set up my drone like this, and the opponent happens to stand block there because you baited them with like an empty jump here, as opposed to like a low JK or even an air dash back JK. This can be quite real mix as opposed to land 2k if you time it correctly, by the way. There are a myriad of ways to bait the opponent into standing. And if they do, and again, I think you kind of have to do this on read, you'll get that fuzzy. And I think that's pretty good, not utilized much. The issue with this one is it is very susceptible to DS. In fact, it's always counterable by DS. And if you want to actually get around the opponent's DS with drone, you time a 486 toward the end of the block stun, which is much before the explosion goes off. So you're kind of doing a read as to whether or not they're going to DS. I mean, you don't lose anything per se. If they DS during the drone and you go for this mix-up, you can kind of run up and take space after and still be plus. But it just won't feel that good, and it's just much more susceptible to DS than some of the other ones, so worth mentioning. And of course, it takes your security away. So next up, we're going to discuss TKBRC fuzzies, especially ones that, for starters, are kind of from jump cancels and not fast RC. I'm talking about this sort of thing. And this fuzzy is quite solid actually. So I'll explain why now, but first I'm going to show that it actually is a fuzzy by turning on 6p here. Even if you're a little bit too high on your JK, it will still be a fuzzy, so that is worth noting here. It's relatively lenient. You can set it up off 5k. However, again, you really would like to make sure that they're in the RC slowdown so you don't have any kind of shenanigans to risk your off close slash. It will always be gapless. And you can at the very least force the opponent to block off of 5k because they won't be able to do anything here. And you can punish them pretty hard. So one thing that is worth mentioning about this setup, if you get a frame 1 TK, so in other words, the JK is low to the ground as possible like that, you can actually get a land cancel here. And that will allow you to be more plus on your land 248 than you would in other cases. In fact, you'll be up to plus 15. And that means that you can easily throw any button that the opponent mashes. You can see here, frame bar, my throw is active on like the 4th frame of her wake up. So, and coming out of guard crush, of course. So that means that you can't be mashed on. That is, in fact, kind of a strike throw. And you can even fight fuzzy by doing 2k or another 248 even, like a little microdash 248 can serve that effect because you're so plus 15. It's really quite solid even on block, so that's a big plus with this one. Another plus with this one is that it is a very nice way to bait YRC, especially if you're conditioning by baiting opponents into mashing YRC on close slash, which can be the way to counter some of the other fuzzies and other mix-ups that Goldlewis has, like this. And obviously your YRC punish is very high, and people just panic YRC all the time against Goldlewis, and so that is really, really good. But that doesn't mean that YRC is not an interact point at all. Right here, YRC is RPS. You do have to kind of commit to a bait there if you don't want to get YRC'd, which, you know, fine enough. And another issue with this one is that it's a little susceptible to IBFD against very strong opponents right there. This is a common setup for various other fuzzies in the game. Depending on spacing, it can even invalidate it sometimes, so worth pointing out. And of course, this is again a slow RC. It's a blue RC, but it's still a slow RC, so all the weaknesses from before apply to this one as well. Benefits are that it's universal, corner, and mid-screen, and it's just very consistent and easy to set up. It's like a good starting point if you want to extend your fuzzy game a little bit, okay? So it's important to mention and quite useful as well. One quick aside, because your backturn there is going to be effectively a last frame 862, as long as there's no FD, you can also fuzzy various characters. Not everyone. Not exactly sure on which this works and doesn't work. Doesn't work on Geo at the very least, that's all I can say, but figured I'd throw it in there and mention it. Next up we have my personal favorite fuzzy, and that would be Fast Blue RC 862, Microdash JKJD. It looks like this. So this fuzzy is absolutely phenomenal, and you can even see it works in corner against Soul. More on that in a second here. But this fuzzy is excellent because it is a fast blue RC fuzzy. That means it is extremely meter efficient. In fact, you can even build nearly back to 50 meter on hit. So yeah, extremely strong conversions that you can get from this fuzzy and build back to a lot of meter consistently. It's very good for that reason. And of course you can kind of loop it if you end up in that situation. So that is something that is extremely strong about it, okay? Now, some comments on the consistency of this one. It never works on Mei, Geo, and Jacko. It is inconsistent against Eno and also Millia, only if she's in the corner. And it has some weird interactions with Faust, Chipp, and Pot, depending on if they stand or crouch block the close slash before the 862. Okay, so those are kind of all the ones to be aware of, but it's relatively universal and works mid-screen and corner on many other characters. And that is really good for a fast blue RC fuzzy. Really good. Now, downside of this one, again, inherently YRCable because it is close slash fast blue RC. You really have no way to bait it. And another issue is that it is hard to confirm. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is quite difficult to confirm on hit and fuzzy on block because you need to microdash in order for your JK to hit against most characters. can see here, for example, if I try it against Soul without the microdash, it's not going to work. I managed to get it there. You want to make sure you're getting a gapless string down here on the frame bar when you're trying your fuzzy to make sure you're doing it correctly. But it's kind of executionally tough against some characters. It's also worth pointing out. So against Kai, for example, it is a lot harder than it is against Soul. And it kind of just depends on character, and you really want to get your microdash timing down as well as you can. But it still works, even in the corner. It is quite hard though. Another benefit of this one, you're very, very plus on block, and the spacing is pretty favorable. So if you don't want to confirm that this hits and go for fuzzy, you can easily do the same frame strike throw coming out of guard crush. And it's pretty easy on this one. The spacing works out so that you just have to dash right up to them and then do it. Timing is pretty simple. Also, people will get jump scared by this 862. And the 862 itself will hit very often. It's another huge benefit of this mix-up. And if the 862 does hit, thanks to our new buffs, you get quite the combo. Close slash and corner, this is obviously extremely, extremely strong if you do get the hit. And you can also kind of condition people to block high there on the fast blue RC, kind of as a twitch reaction. And if they do, that means that this kind of thing is going to become much more of a mix-up. And this is extremely high reward as well. I featured it in my other videos. You can get your same frame strike throw out of guard crush. It's just a really good situation, okay? So this one, very beneficial. It's just hard to hit confirm and fuzzy and hit your microdash all at the same time. So executionally demanding, but very good. Very, very good. So that's going to be our next featured fuzzy. It is 248 fprc 486 and then a microdash jkjd. So the theory behind this one is that for most characters, if they crouch block a 486, they're going to be minus 16. And that means that you have a 2-frame window to get some dash momentum with your JK and then do a fuzzy. And you force them to be minus 16 by starting with the 248 and then FRCing into the 486 because they're low, obviously. They're blocking low, they're crouching for the 248. And so that's kind of the idea behind it. And this fuzzy is really, really good. The problem is that it is extremely difficult. It is super, super tight. You're basically cutting the leniency that you have by, you know, an extra frame or two from the other one, from the fast blur C862, and that makes a big difference. Now, it also is really useful in the same situations. The main benefit of this one over that one is that it's not as wire seeable, because as soon as they block this 248, they're in guard crush. And so from the time they are in guard crush there to them blocking the fuzzy, they can't do anything. They have to guess on the fuzzy itself. DS is an option, of course, but that's all they can do. And then burst, I suppose. So this one's a little character specific. It works on everyone except for Mei, Chipp, Ram, Geo, Jacko, and elph mid-screen. It only works in corner against Soul and Pot, which really sucks. But one thing that's nice about this one, no microdash is required for fuzzing the big bodies. So like Nago, Faust, Goldlewis himself, Potemkin, you can always just do it. And it is very useful against them for that reason. You have an FRC fuzzy here that you can just send with very low execution. And so that's kind of a big draw of this one. It's also relatively easy to input the setup itself, as opposed to this, for example. That one can drop in tournament pretty often. This is much harder to drop. I didn't have meter there. But yeah, this is much harder to drop. So that's pretty useful. It has its place, you know, a little bit of a niche benefit over the other one, but can be worth it in some situations. This is the next fuzzy we're going to be discussing. It has a name apparently, and it's called Bailolo because Rang and I developed this one, and it is extremely strong. He started using it and getting a lot of success with it. Same with me. And the reason I suppose is that it's like a double entendre in French. Apparently Lolo is a drug, but it was also in a sense by me because I made it with the Rang. Or popularized it at least, or we're bringing it to prominence. Anyway, very, very good fuzzy. It's just rising JD, fast blue RC, JD, and it can even work from some heights as well, but it varies. It's very good. So this is universal mid-screen. I haven't tested corner, so I'm not 100% sure. I suspect it is nearly universal in corner, if not universal, but I can't say for certain. It's going to be a little bit harder. The main challenge with this one is just making sure that you're microdashing correctly, so it's quite important to lab. And in corner again, not sure on which characters this does and doesn't work on. All I can say is it's like, for example with Kai, it's just a lot harder to hit the timing correctly in the corner. But this is an extremely good fuzzy, okay? It maybe can lose to YRC at some spacings, but JD is so big, like you can just outspace at YRC there in some cases, which is really, really nice. Like, who's going to YRC on this? This is not a good spot to YRC. You'll just outrange it. They're not going to react to fast blue RC, I can promise you that. They can maybe YRC right here afterward, but that's a bait point for you because you're extremely plus. So really, really, really good fuzzy, and I need to see more of this. And of course, this is one that you can also set up relatively easily, kind of at the end of your pressure. This sort of thing is a very common spot to JD, you know. You can also set this up pretty safely at the end of your pressure. Very common turn steal, for example, right there. Mid-screen as well. I mean, it's JD. You JD all the time. So, not exactly hard to get. It's extremely good. Should be used more, and I wanted to bring attention to it. Moving on. Now, what if you like the spirit of that one, but you're having trouble with a microdash? I promise you that's going to happen. Well, there is a manual timing kind of workaround. It doesn't take away manual timing, but it moves it to a different place. And that fuzzy looks like this. So you can go ahead and set up another fuzzy off of a low fbrc JK, but you have to confirm the height that you're at in order to do this. Now, it's not too hard because JD is a high attack level, and the screen freezes for a second every time they have to block this. So you can really wait till you're at the right height to input this. It'll still crush 6Ps. It can still safe jump reversals. It can still be a little bit YRC safe in some cases. But it's just a little harder to time. Now you can do this in some places where you can't do the JD fuzzy. For example, if they get a low block on your JD like this, we already showed that you cannot get a JD fuzzy off of that. But with this fuzzy you can. And no microdash is required. It's universal. And that is really good. Again, I haven't tested this one in corner yet, but you're welcome to. It's, yeah, clearly extremely strong. Again, fast blue RC fuzzy. You get really good conversion, super meter efficient, can loop itself if you hit them, and then you build back to 50 on your Oki if you didn't choose to wall break them. Just extremely good all around, right? Just super, super good. So next up we have a fuzzy that strikes the middle ground of these. No manual timing required, and no microdash required. Essentially, no problems at all, but it's character specific and the list is short. This one works against Sol, Axel, Millia, Zato, Leo, Nago, Geo, Anji, Asuka, and elph only. Does not work against any of the rest of the characters, but it's really good. Just, you know, JD fbrc JS. No microdash required, assuming I'm not ass and I don't delay things at all. Super, super good. Little note, this one not really going to work in the corner very consistently, so keep that in mind. It's really just for mid-screen. But it really takes any kind of ability to mess up out of the equation, and you still get your fuzzy that you set up from a JD that is fast blue RC. So worth mentioning. It's kind of the middle ground, like I said, but that actually covers all the fuzzies that I wanted to go over for this video. I sincerely recommend labbing, especially the JD and fast blue RC 862 fuzzy timings, and hit confirming fast blue RC 862 is also worth labbing. It is not trivial at all. Okay, I hope I see more in the future and less of this. Well, unless of course it's preceded by this. But anyway, thank you all. Much appreciated. And I'll see you in another few months whenever I decide to upload my next video. Goodbye.